children. I'm just going to read you a story. This is my favourite book. This is about the Mousehole cat. It's a lovely story, nearly based on a true story as well, which makes it nice. At the far end of England, a land of rocks and moorland stretched itself into a blue-green sea. Between its high headlands lie tiny sheltered harbours where the fishing boats hide when the winter storms are blowing. One of these harbours is so small and the entrance between its great stone water breakers are so narrow that the fishermen call it the Mousehole. The people who live in the village around the harbour grew fond of the name, and they call their village Mousehole to this very day. They say it in a Cornish way though, like Mousehole, but you can say it as you choose. Once there lived in the village a cat whose name was Mouser. She had an old cottage with a window overlooking the harbour, and an old rocking chair with patchwork cushions, and an old fisherman named Tom. Mouser had had many kittens in her time, but they'd all grown up and left home. Her eldest son kept the inn and the Keysight. It was noisy and smoky, and this man had once spilled beer on Mouser's head as he was drawing a pint. She didn't go there very often, you see. One of her daughters kept the shop on the corner. It was busy and crowded, and her lady had once stepped on Mouser's tail as she was weighing out some vegetables, so she didn't go there very often either. Sometimes Mouser felt that her children had not trained their people properly. Her own pet, old Tom, he was very well behaved. He never spilt the cream when he was filling her saucer. He always soaked the range to a beautiful golden glow. He rocked the rocking chair just at the right speed. He knew exact spot behind her left ear where Mouser liked to be tickled. And what's more, he never wasted his time drawing pints of beer or weighing out vegetables. When he was not looking after Mouser, he passed the day in the most useful way possible. He took his little boat through the narrow opening between the great breakwaters out into the blue-green sea and caught fish for Mouser's dinner. You see old Tom. Mouser was very partial to a plate of fresh fish. In fact, she never ate anything else, but she did like a little variety. So, on Mondays, they made morgy broth, Mouser's favourite fish stew. On Tuesday, they baked cake and topped it with golden mashed potatoes. On Wednesday, they cooked kedgeree with delicious smoked ling. On Thursday, they grilled fair maids, a mouth-watering meal. On Fridays, they fried launces with a knob of butter and a squeeze of lemon. On Saturdays, they soused scad with vinegar and onions. And on Sundays, they made stargazy pie with prime pilchards in pastry. All in all, Mouser's days passed very pleasantly. Then one year there came a terrible winter. At the end of England, the blue-green sea turned grey and black. The great storm cat is stirring, thought Mouser as she watched at a window. The wind whined like a wild thing about the high headlands. It came hunting for the fishing boats in their hidden harbours. When the great storm cat is howling, thought Mouser, it is best to stay snug indoors by a friendly fire. The sea drew itself up into a giant waves and flung itself against the great breakwaters. All along the coast of Cornwall, the stone walls stood the shock. Then the sea sucked up all its strength again and roared right over them, sinking the sailing boats in their home havens. But it could not get into the Mousehole. Mouser watched as the great storm cat clawed with its giant cat's paw through the gap into the harbour wall. But it was too small. It snarled and leapt up the great water breaker under the lowering sky, but it was too high. The fishing boats sat safe as mice in their own mouse hole, but they could not get out. Can you see the cat's paw? And because the fishermen could not fish, there was no more food. They ate up all the few vegetables that were left in the storm-wrapped gardens. They ate up all the salted pilchards that were left in the cellars. Mouser hated vegetables, and the pilchards were far too salty for her taste. So there was nothing left. The cats and their people grew very hungry. Mouser sat by her window, staring out into the storm, and thought longingly of morgy broth and stargazy pie. Every day the fishermen gathered on the quayside, and sometimes they would try and take a boat through the Mousehole, but always the great storm cat lay in wait for them, and they were lucky to escape with their lives. Then, at last, one evening, as old Tom sat with Mouser on his knee, she felt him take a deep sigh. "Mouser, my handsome," he said, for he was a courteous and well-spoken man. "Mouser, my handsome, it will soon be Christmas, and no man can stand by Christmas and see the children starve. Someone must go fishing, come what may, and I think it must be me. It cannot be the young men, for they have wives and children and mothers to weep for them if they do not return. But my wife and parents are long gone, and my children are all grown up and gone." Mouser purred to tell him that she understood, for it was the same for her. "I shall go out tomorrow, Mouser, my handsome," said the old man, "and I shall not come back without a catch." Mouser purred louder to tell him that she would go with him, for he was the only man, she thought, and men were like mice in the paws of the great cat storm. Besides, she knew that if he did not come back, she would not much care to live in a cottage without him. There'd be no one to pour the cream, to stoke up the range, or rock the rocking chair. There'd be no one in the world who knew just where she liked to be tickled behind her left ear. "Tomorrow night, Mouser, my handsome," he said, "we shall eat morgy broth, baked hake, ling of launces, fair maid, scowscad, and stargazy pie." Then Mouser purred as she could burst to tell him that she loved him more than all of these things. The next morning they set out very early before the others were waking. Before they went, Tom stoked up the old range and damped it down so it would burn steadily until they returned. He hung a lamp in the window so it would shine out across the harbour and light their way. As they reached the quayside, Mouser looked back through the wind and rain and thought how warm and welcoming the window looked. Hey, can you see? Soon their little boat was crossing the harbour walls towards the Mousehole Gap, and the voice of the great cat storm rose all around them like a giant cat wailing. As she listened to its wailing, Mouser felt a sudden strange sadness for him. How lonely he must be, she thought, endlessly hunting the mice men of the deeps of the darkness and never returning into the rosy glow of a red-hot range. And her kind heart was moved to comfort him. Many a tomcat had Mouser tamed in her time with the sweetness of her singing. Now she lifted her head and sang like a siren, joining her call with the cry of the great storm cat. See the picture? And so it was that he was taken off guard as the little boat made its way and its bid for freedom. Soothed by the sweetness of Mouser's serenade, the great storm cat paused in its prowling and pulled back its giant claw for the mere moment. Swiftly the little boat passed through the Mousehole and out into the open sea. The great storm cat played with them as the cat plays with the mouse. He would let them loose for a little while as they fought their way towards the fishing grounds. Then down would come his giant cat paw in flurry of foam and water. But he did not strike to sink them, for that would have spoiled his sport. When they reached the fishing grounds, the sea was so rough that it was hard to put the nets out. "I fancy you must sing again, Mouser, my handsome," said Tom, "for your voice seems to soothe the sea like the sirens of old." So Mouser sang again, longer and louder than she'd ever sung before. Indeed, old Tom was forced to block up his ears so that the siren song should not distract him from the business of fishing. And again the great storm cat paused in its play and sang with her until the nets were safely shot. Beautiful picture. All day they fished in a seething sea. The waves were so high and the clouds so low that they soon lost sight of the shore. And all the time the great storm cat played with the little boat, striking it, then losing it, but never quite sinking it. And whenever its claws grew too sharp, Mouser would sing to him to soften the edge of his anger. As the evening came down, they hauled in the nets into the belly of the boat, tumbling ling, launces, scud, hake and fair maidens, enough fish for the whole cauldron of morgy broth, enough pilchards for 500 stargazy pies. "Mouser, my handsome, we are all saved," said old Tom, "if we can bring this haul home into harbour." But Mouser knew that the great storm cat would strike when he saw them run for the shelter of the Mousehole. She knew that the game serves only to sharpen the appetite for the feast to follow. Is it his meal or mine, thought Mouser, as she looked into the floundering fish in the belly of the boat. Blue, green and silver, they glistened into the greyness. It made her mouth water just to look at them. As she thought of the morgy broth, murmuring away on the top of the range, the stargazy pie growing golden in the oven, Mouser began to purr, and her purring rose like a hymn to home above the noise of the great storm cat's howling. Such music had not reached the ears of the great storm cat since the time of dawn. For when do cats purr out in the wind and the darkness? Puzzled, he paused in his howling, bending its ear to the catch of the strange sound. It seemed to him that he had once heard such a song before, but there was no more than a storm kitten. The great storm cat grew quiet. Gone was its hunger for hunting and making his meal of the mice men. Only the pleasure of the purring remained. Then the great storm cat began to purr with Mouser, and as the soft sound grew, the winds waned and the waves weakened. Night fell, and the little boat sailed back across the slackened sea. As they came into sight of home, a strange sight met their eyes. The whole village of Mousehole was shining with light and lanterns gleaming along both arms of the harbour. For when the people of Mousehole awoken to find old Tom's boat missing and a light left on in his window, they knew he'd gone out to find fish for them, or to be perished in the deep water. All day they'd watched and waited, staring out into the cloud-racked sea, but they could see no sign of him. And when night fell, the women went home and set candles in all their windows, and every man lit his lantern and went down to the harbour walls. See the lovely picture? As they walked, as they waited and watched, they saw that the wind was dying and that the sea was growing calm. The dark clouds lifted into a thin moon shone out between them. In the light of the thin moon they saw a small boat coming in behind it, and the smallest, tamest storm kitten of the wind. As old Tom and Mouser came through the Mousehole gap, a sudden breeze caught them, a tiny, playful cat's paw, like a gesture of farewell. Oh, it's a lovely picture, look at that. There was a great deal of cooking in Mousehole that night. The people made a whole cauldron of morgie broth. They baked hake, cooked kedgeree, grilled fair maids, fried lances, scald scad. They baked 100 stargazy pies. Then people and cats, they feasted together until the hunger was no more than just a memory. And every year since that day, in the inn on the quayside, the people of Mousehole hold a fish feast on the night before Christmas Eve and raise their glasses to the memory of old Tom. And every year, in the yard on the back of the inn, the cats of Mousehole gather and raise a great howling to the memory of old Mouser. And every year, every folk come from all over Cornwall at Christmas time to see Mousehole lit up with 1,000 lights, shining their message of hope and safe haven to all those who pass in peril on the sea. And that, children, is the end of the Mousehole Cat. I hope you enjoyed it. That is my favourite book. The pictures are amazing, I think. Okay, all take care. See you soon. Bye bye.